wore a leather jacket, a long gray beard, and carried years of road behind his eyes. To one young cop, he looked like trouble, but that trouble was a war hero and a legend among the Hells Angels. The next day, hundreds of bikers rode into town, not to fight, but to show what true respect really means. The late afternoon sun painted the streets of Redwood Valley in gold, the kind of light that made even a quiet town look like a movie scene. The steady rumble of a Harley echoed through the empty road, turning a few heads as it passed. At the center of it all rode old Joe Grizzly Walker, a man carved by wind, war, and asphalt. His beard was long and silver, his hands scarred and strong, his jacket faded but full of history. On its back, the iconic Hells Angels patch, wings spread wide, told stories no words ever could. Joe wasn't looking for trouble that day. He was on his way to a veterans' meet, a small gathering of old friends who had fought wars together, both overseas and on the open road. For him, the ride was peace, the only kind he understood anymore, but not everyone saw it that way. As Joe cruised past the town diner, the flashing red and blue lights broke the calm. He sighed. "Here we go again," he muttered under his breath as he eased the bike to the side of the road. Out stepped Officer Brad Miller, young, sharp, and full of something dangerous: arrogance. He'd been on the force less than a year, and in that short time, he'd developed a reputation for throwing his weight around, especially when he thought no one important was watching. Brad adjusted his sunglasses and swaggered toward Joe. "License and registration," he barked, not as a request but as a challenge. Joe calmly took off his gloves, his movement slow, deliberate. "Sure thing, officer," he said in his gravelly voice. "What's the problem?" Brad looked him up and down. The tattoos, the jacket, the bike Engman, everything screamed biker. But to Brad, it screamed criminal. "The problem," Brad said, puffing his chest out, "is your kind doesn't belong in this town." Joe's eyes narrowed. "My kind?" Brad smirked. "Yeah, outlaws, troublemakers. You think you can roll into Redwood and do whatever you want?" Joe chuckled, shaking his head. "Kid, I'm just passing through. Ain't here to start anything." But Brad wasn't listening. He saw a chance to show off, to prove something to himself, to his fellow officers, maybe even to his ego. He reached out, grabbed Joe by the jacket, and twisted his arm behind his back before Joe could even blink. "Hey, easy," Joe hissed, the pain shooting through his shoulder. The scene caught the attention of a few people outside the diner. Phones came out. Cameras started recording. A couple of bystanders shouted, "Hey!"
"He didn't do anything."
Brad ignored them. "You're under suspicion," he said sharply, though he had no idea what for. He just wanted control, and in that moment control meant power. Joe didn't fight back. He didn't resist. He just stood there, his voice calm and steady despite the pain. "Son," he said slowly, "you have no idea who you're messing with." But Brad wasn't listening. He cuffed Joe, pushed him toward the squad car, and shoved him inside. The old biker sat silently in the back seat, staring out the window as the sunset faded into night. He'd been through worse: wars, fights, betrayals, but something about this felt different. Not because it hurt, but because it was disrespect. 3 hours later, after paperwork that made no sense and no charges that could stick, Joe was released. No apology, no explanation, just cold stares and silence. He stepped out of the station, cracked his knuckles, and adjusted his leather jacket. His bike was still parked outside, untouched as if it were waiting for him. Before starting the engine, he pulled out an old flip phone, the kind only men of his generation still used. He dialed a number and waited for a voice on the other end. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's Grizzly." "We got a problem." There was a pause. Then the voice on the other side simply replied, "Say the word." Joe looked toward the horizon, toward the sleeping town that had no idea what was coming. "Tell the boys," he said. "Everything." He hung up, revved the engine once, and disappeared into the night. By sunrise, the peaceful little town of Redwood Valley was about to wake up to the sound of 100 roaring engines, and every one of them would be coming for respect. When Joe Grizzly Walker stepped out of the police station, the night air was cold and quiet, the kind of silence that hides a storm. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply brushed the dust off his faded leather jacket, adjusted the patch on his back, and took a deep breath. The street lamps flickered against the chrome of his Harley, still parked exactly where he'd left it. He ran a hand over the handlebar, like greeting an old friend after a fight, then reached into his pocket for his phone. It wasn't a smartphone, no fancy touchscreen, just a scratched-up flip phone that had survived more road miles than most cars ever would. He opened it, dialed a number from memory, and waited. When a gruff voice answered, Joe said just 4 words. "Tell the boys everything." He didn't have to explain. The man on the other end knew what it meant. By sunrise, the message had already spread through every biker chat, backroad bar, and clubhouse from Nevada to Oregon. An old Hells Angel got roughed up by a rookie cop in Redwood Valley. No one asked for proof. They didn't need it. When one of theirs was disrespected, and especially a legend like Grizzly, the Brotherhood answered. Always. At first, the town of Redwood Valley went about its morning like any other day. The bakery opened, kids went to school, and the sheriff's department barely noticed the whispers. But just before noon, the owner of Maggie's diner heard something strange. A faint rumble in the distance, low and steady, like thunder hiding behind the hills. She stepped outside, shielding her eyes from the sun. Then she saw them. Tiny specks at first, glinting silver in the light. Then bigger. Then louder. The ground began to tremble as dozens of Harleys rolled over the ridge, their engines blending into one powerful roar. Chrome flashed, jackets flapped in the wind, and that unmistakable red and white patch gleamed like a warning sign. "Are those bikers?" one man asked, stepping out of the hardware store. "Not just bikers," another whispered. "Those are Hells Angels." By the time the first group entered Main Street, the sound had grown deafening, a heartbeat of engines pulsing through every corner of town. Shop windows rattled, coffee cups shook on diner tables, and dogs barked from every yard. The riders didn't race through or shout. They moved with purpose, organized, unified like soldiers in formation. Locals peeked through blinds and locked their doors. Some filmed on their phones, their hands trembling. The police department got the call within minutes. Chief, you might want to step outside," the dispatcher stammered. When the chief opened the blinds, his jaw dropped. The entire parking lot of the Redwood Police Department was lined with motorcycles, row after row stretching down the street. Engines idled, rumbling like an earthquake that refused to stop. The lead rider parked front and center, his helmet reflecting the sunlight. He turned it slowly, staring at the station with cold, steady eyes before killing the engine. Behind him, nearly 100 Hells Angels sat still, their jackets like battle flags. One by one, the engines began to shut off. Thump, 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 until the town fell into a heavy silence. No shouting, no chaos, just a presence so powerful it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Inside the diner, Officer Brad Miller sat frozen at a corner booth, staring out the window at the sea of bikes. His hands clenched the coffee cup so tight it shook. He'd wanted to prove himself, to show he wasn't afraid of bikers. Now he couldn't even swallow. Maggie whispered from behind the counter. "What did you do, Brad?" Outside, the Hells Angels didn't move an inch. They were waiting, not for violence, but for a reckoning. A town that once thought bikers were nothing but trouble was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. Because when you disrespect one man, you wake up a brotherhood that never forgets. By 3 p.m., Redwood Valley no longer sounded like a small town. It sounded like thunder trapped in the streets. Rows of Harleys lined both sides of Main Street, chrome glinting beneath the sun, handlebars turned perfectly in sync. Every shop, every gas pump, every diner entrance was guarded by the silent presence of Hells Angels. Their leather jackets rippled in the afternoon heat, red and white patches gleaming like battle colors. From behind drawn curtains, townsfolk whispered in fear. "Are they here for revenge? Is the police station safe? Should we call the state troopers?" But no one moved. The bikers weren't smashing windows or shouting threats. They just stood there, a wall of steel and loyalty, calm yet unshakable. The rumble of engines faded to a low growl as more bikes arrived, idling at the edge of town. A little boy on his porch stared wide-eyed, clutching his toy car. One biker caught his gaze, lifted 2 fingers to his helmet, and gave the kid a small salute. The boy smiled, not fully understanding the weight of what was unfolding. Inside Maggie's diner, the smell of coffee mixed with fear. Officer Brad Miller sat at the counter, pretending to scroll through his phone. His hand trembled so badly that the spoon clinked against the mug over and over. Maggie, wiping the counter, shot him a glare. "You brought this storm here, Brad." He swallowed hard. I didn't mean for this." "You never do," she said flatly. Then the sound of a door creaking open cut through the diner. Clink. The little bell above it jingled once. Every conversation stopped. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Standing in the doorway was Joe Grizzly Walker. His boots echoed against the tile floor as he stepped in. Calm, steady, shoulders broad, eyes unblinking. The sun framed him from behind, turning the dust in the air into gold. Outside, nearly 100 bikers turned their heads toward the windows, following his every move. The entire town held its breath. "Afternoon, officer," Joe said quietly, removing his gloves and placing them on the counter. "Remember me?" Brad rose slowly, his chair scraping the floor. Look, I was just doing my job." Joe tilted his head, a faint smile under his beard. "Your job, huh? I was doing mine too, staying out of trouble. But you turned it into something else." Brad tried to speak, but his throat locked. Sweat slid down his temple. Around them, the diner's customers, truckers, a waitress, the cook, all froze. Joe reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of old, worn dog tags, the metal edges dull from years of wear. He placed them gently on the counter. The sound was soft, but it felt like a thunderclap. "You see, son," he said, voice low and heavy, "you didn't just arrest a biker yesterday. You arrested a veteran, a man who's bled for this country while you were still learning how to shave." The words cut through the air like a blade. The cook stopped flipping burgers. The waitress covered her mouth. Brad's eyes dropped to the tags. Faded numbers, a name, a lifetime of service. He whispered, I didn't know." Joe nodded slowly. "That's the problem. You didn't care to know." He turned toward the window. Outside, the line of bikers stood in perfect stillness, engines off, helmets on. They weren't there to fight. They were there to witness. Joe looked back at Brad, his tone softening. "You see all those men out there? Every one of them would have taken a bullet for me. And for each other. Brotherhood, respect. That's something you can't learn from a badge, kid. You learn it from loyalty." Brad's lips trembled. "What happens now?" Joe gave a faint grin. "Nothing you can't fix. If you start acting like a man instead of a uniform." He picked up his dog tags, looped them around his neck, and stepped toward the door. The bell rang again as he opened it. Sunlight poured in. Every biker outside turned their engines off, bowed their heads for a brief moment, and watched as Joe walked down the steps. Inside, no one moved. The silence was deeper than fear. It was respect. Brad sank back into his seat, staring at the door where the old biker had just left. The mug in front of him had gone cold, and as the engines roared to life again outside, echoing down Main Street, one truth settled over everyone in that diner. Sometimes, the loudest lesson is taught by the quietest man. That night, Redwood Valley didn't sleep. The streets, still trembling from the echo of Harleys, were now glowing with something no one expected. Kindness. The Hells Angels didn't cause chaos. They caused reflection. Instead of burning rubber or starting fights, they spread out quietly across town. Some walked to the old Maple Street Park, where swings creaked from years of neglect and litter scattered the grass. Without a word, bikers started cleaning, picking up trash, repainting benches, even fixing the rusted slide. Their leather jackets gleamed under the streetlights as paint cans clinked and brushes moved. An old couple across the street watched from their porch, holding hands. "Would you look at that?" the old man whispered. "They're cleaning the park." His wife nodded slowly, eyes soft. "Maybe we were wrong about them." Across town at Randy's auto garage, the scene was just as surreal. The local mechanic, a man in his late 60s, stood by helplessly as his roof sagged from years of wear. When the bikers arrived, he braced himself, ready for trouble. But instead, Joe Grizzly Walker handed him a new toolbox. "Heard you've been needing a hand," Joe said. "Let's fix her up." By midnight, sparks flew from welding torches. Laughter echoed between revving engines and country music playing softly from someone's radio. The garage lights stayed on all night, not because of trouble, but because brotherhood had taken over. Meanwhile, a group of angels rolled up to the Redwood shelter, a small building that served hot meals to the homeless. The volunteers inside froze when they saw the patches, skulls, wings, flames. But the leader of that group, a biker named Tex, simply smiled and held up 3 large bags of groceries. "Where do you want 'em?" he asked. Within minutes, the shelter's kitchen was buzzing with the sound of sizzling pans and laughter. Big, tattooed men in leather vests served soup and bread like it was a mission. One even kneeled to hand a bowl to a little girl, giving her his bandana after she said she liked the color. Out on the sidewalk, curious residents peeked through windows and doorways. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The same men they feared just hours ago were helping, fixing, feeding, giving. Every time someone asked why, Joe gave the same calm answer. Because one man disrespected us. But we'll teach respect, not by fear, but by example. By sunrise, the transformation was undeniable. The park looked cleaner than it had in years. The auto shop had a new roof. The shelter had more food than it could store. When the mayor arrived that morning, he didn't come with reporters or police. He came alone. He found Joe sitting on the hood of his bike outside Maggie's diner, sipping coffee as the town slowly woke up. "I don't know what to say," the mayor admitted, shaking his head. "Your people. You changed how this town sees you." Joe smiled faintly, setting down his cup. "We're not angels or devils, sir. We're just men who ride for brotherhood and loyalty. But no one disrespects one of ours." The mayor nodded. "I understand that now. And I think the whole town does too." As Joe stood, he extended his hand, firm, steady, and real. The mayor took it. Cameras clicked in the distance as residents gathered, still in disbelief. By the time the first engines roared to life again, the news had already begun spreading online. A headline popped up everywhere: "100 Hell's Angels ride into town and leave it better than they found it." The story went viral overnight. Millions watched videos of bikers sweeping parks, handing out food, and shaking hands with locals. Comments flooded social media. "This is what real respect looks like. Never judge a book by its cover. Brotherhood isn't about looks, it's about actions." And back in Redwood Valley, long after the roar of the Harleys faded into the hills, people started seeing bikers, and maybe even themselves, a little differently. Because that day, the Hells Angels didn't just ride through town. They rode straight into its heart. Officer Brad Miller sat alone in the quiet of his small office at the Redwood Valley Police Station. The once cocky grin was gone. His badge, polished as always, didn't shine quite the same. The weight of what he'd done, of who he'd disrespected, hung heavier than his uniform. 3 days had passed since the incident, and the entire country knew the story. His chief had suspended him for misconduct. The department's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters camped outside, asking how a small-town cop had managed to anger an entire chapter of Hell's Angels, only for them to respond with grace instead of vengeance. Brad didn't have an answer. He just sat there staring at the wall, replaying the moment he'd grabbed that old man by the jacket. The man he now knew wasn't just some biker, but a war veteran and a living legend among riders. Then, the door creaked open. The sound of heavy boots echoed on the tiled floor. Brad looked up, and there he was, Joe Grizzly Walker. His beard caught the sunlight pouring through the blinds. The same worn leather jacket. The same calm in his eyes. Except this time there was no crowd, no cameras, no backup. Just 2 men and the silence between them. Brad stood quickly, his throat tight. "Mr. Walker, I didn't know who you were. I just saw the jacket." Joe let out a low chuckle, not of mockery, but of wisdom. "That's the problem, son. Too many people see patches and forget there's a person underneath." Brad swallowed hard, guilt written across his face. "I shouldn't have treated you like that." Joe nodded, then stepped closer. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small, weathered card. He placed it gently on Brad's desk. Brad looked down. It had just 5 words printed in bold. "Respect is earned, not enforced." For a long moment, Brad said nothing. His eyes lingered on the words, then lifted to Joe again. "You could have ruined me," he said quietly. "You could have turned this whole town upside down." Joe smiled faintly. "We don't ride for revenge, son. We ride for loyalty, for brotherhood. You needed a lesson, not punishment." He turned to leave, stopping just before the door. "You got a good town here, officer. Keep it that way." Brad nodded, his voice low. "Thank you. For not being the man I assumed you were." Joe gave him one last nod. "You'll do better. I can see it." Then he stepped out into the sunlight. Outside, nearly 100 bikes gleamed under the afternoon sun. Engines hummed softly like lions waiting to roar. The air was thick with the scent of leather, oil, and respect. As Joe swung his leg over his Harley, the other biker straightened up, ready to ride. He put on his helmet, glanced once more toward the station, and revved the engine. The deep rumble rolled through the valley like thunder. One by one, the angels followed, chrome flashing and engines roaring as they rode out of Redwood Valley, not in anger, but in unity. Windows opened. Families stepped outside. Children waved. And for the first time, the people of Redwood Valley didn't see outlaws. They saw men, disciplined, loyal, proud. As the roar of the engines faded into the distance, a strange peace filled the town. The same streets that once echoed with judgment now carried a quiet understanding. That day, everyone in Redwood Valley learned something that no book, badge, or law could ever teach. Respect isn't demanded by authority. It's earned through action, and sometimes, legends don't ride into town to destroy it. They ride in to remind it what respect really means. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful and inspiring stories. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.